Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Guide Star by Joy Ellis. Narrated by Shiromi Arserio. Chapter 1. Stella, can you hear me? With a monumental effort, Stella North opened her eyes, and a stream of figures swam in her vision. Smiling, shadowy strangers looking down upon her. She closed her eyes again, preferring the heady confusion of her dreams to this scary, odd-smelling room filled with people she didn't know. The voice persisted. Stella, open your eyes for me. No. She would stay where she was, wrapped in that warm cocoon. It's not nearly as safe as you think. Stella's eyes snapped open. Hello there. Welcome back. You are in the neurosurgical ward at the Pilgrim Hospital. Hospital? Why? She tried to ask, but the words wouldn't come out. Her tongue lolled uselessly, like a piece of damp chamois leather. Someone squeezed her hand. I'm your surgeon, Dr. Field Latimer. Donald to you, and I'll be looking after you. So the voice had a name, and a double-barreled one. God, I must be really ill, she thought. He said he was a surgeon. Do you remember what happened to you, Stella? Stella couldn't think of anything to say. She struggled to focus her wayward mind. Suddenly she had a picture of a brand-new leather jacket. Another dream? No. Black, soft, lined in grey silk. Expensive. She had just put it on, and it felt like heaven, and then... She frowned. Then nothing. What were you thinking of? Can you tell me? My new jacket, she croaked. The words sounded odd, as if they didn't belong to her. Where's my bloody jacket? Laughter trickled around the room, and Dr. Double-Barreled squeezed her hand tighter. Well, that's something, I suppose, he said. Stella wanted to laugh with them, but she didn't get the joke. Then she wanted to cry, and she didn't understand that either. Oh, shit. What did she know? Her panic intensified. Then she heard another voice, gentle and cracking with emotion. Thank God. Oh, thank God. The speaker caught her breath and seemed to sob. But that couldn't be right, could it? She had recognized the voice all right, but its owner never cried. Gran, sweetheart, my darling. Her grandmother took her other hand and, rocking backwards and forwards, held it in silence. Warmed by the familiar touch, Stella's panic subsided and she finally let go of her dreams. She looked around her. Banks of humming, bleeping machines flanked her bed. Most of them seemed to be connected to her own body. Oh, this was not good. This was serious. She had better do an assessment. There was little pain, but she couldn't seem to move. Why? She tried a small wriggle, and felt considerable discomfort down her right side. Something was pulling. A dressing? Dr. Double-Barreled was watching her. It's a drain, Stella. You'll be sore for a while, but it will be out soon. I've had an operation. Several. He smiled cautiously. You've been very ill. Anxiety began to bubble up again. Oh, am I still very ill? You are doing brilliantly. He looked at her intently and seemed to wink. Partly due to my miraculous skills as a surgeon, of course, but... The smile faded somewhat. We do need to do further tests to know what is going on. Going on? Her voice trembled. I think we should tell her everything, Dr. Field Latimer. Tears gone, Stella's grandmother, Beth Cartwright, looked directly at the surgeon. She's a resilient and very brave young woman. My Stella doesn't like being fed half-truths. Right now, Stella felt far from brave, but on some level she knew that her grandmother was right. The surgeon nodded. We know all about her resilience, or she wouldn't be here now. He looked down at her. The thing is, Stella, you have been in an induced coma for 2 weeks. You have damage to your right side, a broken rib, and a considerable flesh wound, all of which should heal well, and if you work on exercising the muscles, they should give you few problems in future. He paused while Stella absorbed what he was saying. So why a coma? Surely a busted rib and a gash to her side weren't that serious. He sat on the edge of her bed. The side injury wasn't all. You also have a serious head trauma, Stella. We have had to wait for the swelling in your brain to subside. That's why we need to do the tests. Head trauma. Did I fall? Was I in an RTC? She stopped, confused. What the hell was an RTC, anyway? No, sweetheart. Beth took over and her words hung in the air like a guillotine blade. It was not an accident. Someone shot you. A while later in the relatives' room, Beth sank down onto a chair and let out a long sigh. She had expected only Edward Byrne, Stella's ex-husband, to be waiting for her, but instead 3 haggard faces looked up expectantly. Edward leaned forward. Well, Beth, how is she? She's awake. Beth patted his knee and allowed herself a tight smile. She's not only awake, but she's talking, and she recognized me. Edward gave a little whoop and hugged the small brunette who sat beside him. I knew she would pull through. Lexi, wife number 2, hugged him back and smiled broadly. We all thought she'd make it, but... Beth knew exactly what Lexi meant. Stella was a police officer and one tough woman, but you couldn't rely on that. You didn't dare. For a moment she saw them as an outsider might. No parents and no anxious spouse or partner, just a wiry stick of a grandmother, a divorced husband, his pretty new wife, and a rather ragged work colleague. Beth looked across the room at the third occupant, a tall, lanky and uncomfortable-looking man in scuffed trainers, faded jeans and a hooded sports sweatshirt. He might have been a teenager, somebody's son, but Beth knew that he was much older than he looked. Robbie was silent, but the relief on his face needed no words. After a while he stood up. I'd better be going. I guess you guys will have a lot to talk about. As he passed Beth, he lightly touched her shoulder. I can't tell you how pleased I am, Mrs. C. Now I know what they mean when they say a tower of strength. I'm sure her recovery has a lot to do with your being there for her. He smiled awkwardly. Well, give her my best. I'll be back as soon as she's well enough for visitors. Oh, and tell her the whole station is rooting for her. The door closed. Lexi smiled. Doesn't look much like a detective, does he? Nor does Stella come to that. Edward added. Still, wouldn't work if they all looked the part, would it? The criminals would spot them a mile off and have a field day. Beth knew that this chat concealed turbulent emotions. For the past 2 weeks they had been considering matters of life and death, and what sort of life might follow a severe head injury. So, what happens next? Asked the ever-practical Edward. Tests, then more tests, assessments, reviews, and then more of the same. Beth felt drained, She had been through some truly dreadful times in her life, but nothing had been as bad as seeing her only grandchild lying in that room, a machine causing her chest to rise and fall. The doctors say it will take a while to evaluate the damage. There was a catch in her voice. And we have to be aware that there will be changes in her, even if her recovery goes well. The doctor told me that no one comes back from a traumatic brain injury exactly as they were before. Donald Field Latimer had sat down with her to explain that the bullet they had removed had struck an area of the brain that affected a multitude of behaviors. No two brain injuries are the same, Beth, but we know that there is a good chance that she will have problems with basic cognitive skills. She'll find it difficult to concentrate, and will have trouble remembering or retaining new information. And she is likely to experience exaggerated mood swings with severe depression. And this is on top of other possible problems, including seizures, loss of balance, vision, sense of smell, hearing. He shrugged. The list is endless. This is just a warning that you should be prepared for anything, but some of the impairments will dissipate completely over time. Her life's course has changed, Beth, but with careful guidance, she will have a life. Beth had nodded, but knew something that the doctor didn't. Stella's career was her life. From dawn to dusk, and on through the night, Stella lived and breathed the police force. Her broken marriage was testament to that. "Can we go in and see her?" Edward asked, breaking into Beth's musings. "Yes, of course. We shouldn't tire her out, but the doctor thinks it will help her to know that she is surrounded and supported by friends and loved ones." Lexi stood up. "I'd better get back for Ethan. I rather dumped him on Mum when we heard the news about Stella coming off the respirator." She smiled at her husband. "He's probably driving her mad by now. You go spend some time with Stella, Eddie. Give her my love and tell her I'll visit tomorrow." She gathered up her bag and coat, pecked him on the cheek and turned to Beth. "Now will you finally get some rest? She's going to need you so much in the coming days, and you need sleep and hot food. Come to us tonight. I've got a chicken casserole in the oven, and there's enough for all of us and a small army." Beth knew she meant it. They certainly hadn't acted like most families following a divorce. They all got on, including Stella and Lexi. "Thank you. I'll wait until she's settled for the evening, then I'll call in on my way home. If you're not with us by 8, I'll come and get you myself," Lexi said. Before having their baby son, she had been a teacher, and every so often she slipped back into classroom mode. "You won't be running marathons again if you neglect your body." "No, Mum." Beth gave a mock salute and tried to look contrite. Long-distance running was the last thing on her mind right now. Even the love of her life, a field spaniel called Frisbee, was holidaying with a neighbour. Edward ran his fingers through his thick brown hair. "How much does she know?" "Just that she was shot, and that she's been in a coma. She can't be inundated with information yet. She won't be able to process it," Beth replied. "But no memory of what happened. Not yet. Possibly never. Maybe for the best." He looked at her. Beth shrugged. "Maybe. I think she'd cope with knowing about what happened to her. It's the fact that she'll never be able to go back into the police force that's worrying me." "With very good reason." Edward's forehead creased. "I certainly wouldn't want to be the one to drop that little bombshell into her lap." "Nor me," Beth said glumly, "although I'm pretty certain who will finish up with that delightful task. What do you reckon?" Edward gave a rueful smile. "Good luck with that." Robbie Melton sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He stared through the windscreen. His earlier euphoria at Stella's reawakening had quickly turned to anxiety. His grandfather had suffered brain damage in the Falklands War, and Robbie would never forget the vague, absent shell that he became. He exhaled and made himself relax. Whatever happened from now on, she had made a good start. If ever there was a woman who would fight back, it was Stella. A small smile spread across his face. In the 5 years they'd worked as a team, she had outshone him by far. Faster, stronger, and brighter. Sure, he had his qualities too, but he knew that Stella could get to the very top. She had made detective sergeant at 30, while he was still a constable. The smile widened, because that was fine by him. He loved his work with a vengeance and had no aspirations for gold braid and pockets full of pips. He sat back and watched figures huddled in warm coats and jackets fight the biting east wind as they hurried across the car park. He and Stella had gelled from the start. Now, without her, he was adrift, working by rote and finding little excitement or pleasure in his life. If she knew how much he was suffering, Stella would give him a bollocking and tell him to get a bloody grip. But somehow he couldn't. She had got him out of several tight corners and once had actually saved his life, even if she denied it vehemently. But he hadn't been there for her when she needed him. He knew it was irrational to feel guilty, because he had been miles away. She was off duty and simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. 2 drug-fueled kids, a bungled robbery and a gun. Stella had done what came naturally. She had protected those around her and taken a bullet for her troubles. 2 bullets, actually. Robbie smashed both his palms hard onto the steering wheel and let out a stifled cry. It wasn't fair. She had been the most alive person he had ever met. He never tired of working with her, despite the teasing he received from some of his colleagues. Some of them had suggested that it would be a relief for him not to be working in her shadow, and that his career would progress further in a different crew. What rot. It had never been cold in her shadow. She needed him as much as he needed her. He'd always seen himself as an important component in a well-oiled machine. Robbie turned the key in the ignition and slowly released the handbrake. Now, he was just a spare part. Chapter 2. 6 months later. Stella looked up at the clock. 2 more minutes on the cross-trainer, and she would have done more than yesterday. Donald Field Latimer, her neurosurgeon, had said she was his only patient ever to actually enjoy physiotherapy. Certainly few begged him to be let into the gym, rather than out of it. Luckily, he was a great believer in physical exercise, and as soon as her side had healed, he, her physiotherapist, and her grandmother had got together and worked out a program for her. In the 6 months since she had left the hospital, Beth's gentle encouragement had turned into a punishing fitness regime that stretched Stella's body further with every session. The wounds had healed well. The scarring on her side was not exactly pretty, but she could handle that, and her hair covered the site of the surgery to remove the bullet to her head. Her mind, on the other hand, was proving trickier to mend. She stood down from the cross-trainer and steadied herself against a wave of dizziness. Her grandmother appeared holding out a water bottle. "Okay, kiddo. Take in some fluids, have a quick shower, then I'll see you in the pool for a wind down." Stella watched her grandmother stride between the pieces of equipment towards the changing rooms. She was now 70, but still wiry and as fit as a much younger woman. Before Stella's injury, Beth had not only trained to run marathons, but was also an aerobics instructor. "I sure hope I've got your genes," muttered Stella, "because if I haven't, this will probably kill me." Like her grandmother, Stella swam like a fish. The pool was the place where all her problems left her, and she could be herself again. Sometimes she was even able to smile. Beth swam up to her, flipped over and floated on her back. "Today was good in there." She nodded towards the gym. "Tomorrow will be even better." Stella felt a rush of emotion and dived before her grandmother saw her tears. She knew that without Gran, she would have given up by now, but the need to meet her expectations was sometimes almost too much to bear. Under the water, She had a sudden memory of waking up in the intensive care unit and realizing that her grandmother was by her side. In those confusing moments she had felt Gran's outpouring of love covering her like a warm duvet on a cold night. She was grateful to the surgeon, but it was her wise grandmother who had brought her back from the banks of the Styx. She had to fight back and get well for Gran's sake. Before the shooting, Stella had climbed sheer rock faces, leapt over roaring torrents suspended on a slim bungee cord, and had run several marathons. But nothing had been as hard as this. Stella swam harder, trying to fight the misery that threatened to engulf her. The problem wasn't her body. Okay, her coordination was rubbish. Her balance was shot and her hand had an occasional tremor, but basically she was really getting strong. She had miraculously avoided seizures and her sight was unimpaired, so she would soon be allowed to drive. She knew she was incredibly lucky, but it didn't help. No, it was her mind that wasn't responding properly, from some subtle but irritating little quirks to full-blown dysfunctions that terrified her. And despite numerous therapy sessions, she still had no idea how to confront them. She wasn't fighting the psychologists. In fact, she readily embraced all the help they could offer. But the underpinning of her whole life had been knocked away from under her. She hardly recognized the woman she had become. Stella powered up and down the pool, trying hard to count her blessings. At first, the simple fact that she was still alive had been enough. She was a survivor. She had taken 2 bullets and was still standing. She had been surrounded by friends and well-wishers, all amazed at her strength and courage. Not that she thought of herself as brave. Actually, she thought she'd been a total prat to get in the line of fire in the first place. But then what did she know? She still couldn't remember anything about it. Now the friends were distancing themselves, and she knew it was because she was pushing them away. Even Edward and Lexi sometimes seemed guarded, as if afraid of setting off an angry outburst. Last week she'd snapped poor Robbie's head off. His hurt look still haunted her. Listen, I don't give a damn about what a blinding good result the team had on the Godwin case, and I don't care about the new arrest stats. If all you can talk about is force stuff, then don't visit. Can't you understand? It's nothing to do with me anymore, she had told him. Later she had rung him and apologized, but his tone was reserved and she sensed that a barrier had come up. If it had been the other way around, she would have had nothing else to talk about either. They were both dedicated police officers, living alone with no partners. Their work was everything. What else would he talk to her about? God, she could be such an idiot sometimes. Stella turned and swam backstroke. She should never have been so harsh on Robbie, who was hoping she would accept the offer of a desk job. One day, a high-ranking officer, someone she only knew by name and reputation, had appeared by her hospital bed and assured her that there would always be a place for her. She had held on to that, like a drowning person clinging to a spar. Then, as the weeks wore on and the extent of her injuries became clear, the offer had subtly changed. She heard words like limited and reduced, and finally she realized that the place for her would be behind a desk. After all she had been through as a serving officer, she couldn't even bring herself to think about it. She imagined watching all her old mates pulling on their stab-proof vests and adjusting their equipment belts ready for the next shout, and it reduced her to tears. There was no way she could sit behind a desk and stare at a monitor all day. Best to be well out of it. If being a glorified clerk was her only prospect, perhaps it would have been better for everyone if she had not "Are you done?" Her gran appeared at her side. "Fancy a few minutes in the jacuzzi?" "Okay, a couple more lengths and I'll join you." Stella dived under the water to wash away the tears. Beth laid the table for lunch, thankful that she had not sold her lovely home. Her friends had all insisted that she needed to downsize. The place was far too big for a woman living alone. Beth thought the old green eye might have something to do with their words. Most of her small circle of contemporaries lived in compact bungalows or 2-bedroomed houses in the village, whereas Coggle's barn was a beautiful conversion with views over the Lincolnshire fields. It probably was too big for one, and it did take a lot of upkeep, but she loved it. Now that she had Stella staying with her, she was pleased that she'd stuck to her guns. One day she might consider moving, when Stella was settled back in her own house. Or maybe she'd only leave feet first. She didn't want change, not at this stage in her life. She'd had enough of that as a young woman. She recalled the frenetic and exciting time when she had lived and worked in London, travelling extensively and dreaming of a place of her own. Well, now she had it, and she wasn't going to let it go until she really had to. Beth wondered when her granddaughter would decide to move back to her own house. It would be a wrench for both of them, but Beth had a feeling that as soon as she was able to drive again, Stella would go. Physically, she was doing amazingly well. If they could just get on top of the mood swings and bouts of depression, then Beth would be happy to let her move on. After all, Stella's house was only half a mile away, just a gentle stroll from Coggle's barn. A noise at the front door made her look around. Her dog, Frisbee, with a mouthful of letters, padded towards her from the hall. "Thank you, Jeeves. Can I have those?" The spaniel obediently released the envelopes onto the floor and sat staring at them hopefully. 2 of the letters were for Stella. It was handy living in a village, as the postman knew everyone and redirected Stella's post to Coggle's barn. "Sorry, nothing for you today, Frizz, unless you'd like to read the Dog's Trust newsletter." The dog strode off to his bed, where he scuffed the carefully folded blankets into an untidy heap and threw himself huffily onto them. Beth placed the letters on the table and called out to Stella, "Post's here, and lunch will be in 5 minutes." Stella appeared a few minutes later. Her pale face was drawn and the darkness beneath her eyes was more pronounced. A feeling of total helplessness engulfed Beth. It wasn't working. None of it. Not the therapy sessions, and now even the exercise routines were not enough. Stella needed help of a different kind, but Beth had no idea where to find it. Stella dropped into a chair, picked up the post, and slowly opened one of the envelopes. Beth saw an official-looking document. Another invitation to apply for a job. Stella's voice was flat. "Surely that's no surprise." "No, I suppose not, even though I told them I wouldn't be accepting it. They don't seem to get the message. If I can't do detective work, then—" Stella left the sentence unfinished. "They don't want to lose you, sweetheart. You're too valuable." "I'm about as useful as a chocolate fire garden, you know it." She stood up and threw the second letter down unopened. "Sorry, Gran. I'm really not hungry. I'm going to lie down for a while." In her room, Stella closed the curtains, lay on the bed and shut her eyes. All she wanted to do was curl up in a tight ball, sleep, and not have to face the world. No decisions, no confusion, no frustrations, no anxiety attacks, just deep, deep sleep. She knew she wasn't being fair on her Gran, and she hated herself for it. The terrible emotional upheaval inside her allowed no room for others. She had no control anymore, and it wasn't her at all. Stella pulled the duvet over her face. She knew she had to fight the black depression that threatened to overwhelm her, but sometimes the sense of failure and despair was just too much to bear. Her reason for being had gone, stolen in the blink of an eye. The rising star of the Fenland Constabulary had plummeted to earth, brought down by a gun. She had only ever wanted to be a good police officer. Downstairs in the kitchen, Beth bit her lip hard. There must be something she could do, another avenue to try. If only— Beth drew in a sharp breath. Where were her brains? Of course. She turned and almost ran to the small room that she used as an office. She pulled open her desk drawer and began to rifle through the old diaries and notebooks it contained. Finally, she found what she was looking for. The pages of the old address book were creased and faded, and many of the names were crossed out. "Bugger old age," she muttered angrily. She leafed through to the letter L. It was a long shot, but worth trying. It
Sample complete. Ready to continue?